The job, as it stands at the moment, has got a very broad remit, but is picking up on both the choral training and also helping people to learn to choral train. We've been training people to sing in choirs for many, many years, and particularly in the last few years there's been such an upsurge of interest in that on TV, the Gareth Malone factor, if you like. But actually the skills that are involved in choir training are many and varied, and a lot of people, myself included to an extent when I started, come into the whole thing from quite an amateur point of view. Now, I was formally trained in many ways, but I've found over the years that by studying particular areas, particularly vocal training and choral direction, conducting orchestras as well, I've learnt so much about gesture and approaches to things that have really informed the way that I work. And there's a great need to share that knowledge, and it's a very productive thing to be doing. You feel as if you're, if you like, passing a baton on in a relay race and encouraging people to come into the profession that I've been in for many years, and to take it on that stage further. When you think, for example, how choirs have developed over the last 20, 30 years and the standards that are expected at a professional level, and some of those things we can learn a great deal from at a more humble level, if you like, parish church level, and actually encourage people to set the bar that little bit higher and draw the people whom they are educating up into a new realm, a new musical experience.
Now I take it then that, well, you kind of learned the job on the job. Is that an important element, or do you want to see more formal training?
I think a mix of both. I've worked, for example, with somebody who appeared to have learnt choir training from a book and knew all the right things to say, but had no concept of quite what the reaction was going to be coming the other way, and didn't know what to look for or how to make it better, really. And at the other extreme, there are people who've done an awful lot of hands-on work with choirs, but perhaps work more, they work more with gut instinct than actual technical expertise. And I think bringing those two things together is very important. But above all, in my job, I'm really hoping to bring an encouraging and a sense of the educational enjoyment that comes with learning in that process. There are people who are quite set in their ways, and sometimes they have fantastic results, and the counter side to that can be that there are sort of spin-offs that they either don't notice or choose not to notice. And actually, I always find that if you have someone coming in and watching you at work, they might come up with a tiny throwaway remark that sets your brain actually alight and excites you to look at yourself afresh and work out how you could be doing something a little bit differently, even in the realms of helping children's level of concentration to improve. I mean, one of the big things I notice over the last few decades is that children's concentration span seems to have shrunk enormously, whether that's to do with how much they spend in time in front of screens and games and that sort of thing. It's a very arguable point. But we need in music to be encouraging children and indeed young adults to develop that mental stamina that allows a really solid educational base. And you bring all these factors together. Bizarrely, I suppose a choir trainer has to be a performer, an entertainer, an educator, all those things rolled into one, as well as being a musician. Let's not forget that. That's quite an important part of it too.
You alluded just now to attention spans, and take that a stage further. One can think about the fact that, there are many distractions in this day and age. Is that the biggest challenge that one has to contend with as a choir trainer? The various challenges that there are, people lead busy lives and so on.
I think it's a contributory factor, certainly. I think people too, particularly younger generations, expect very quick results. And sometimes the concept of any learning process which takes time and a real in-depth practice can be quite a challenge. They expect things to happen just like that. Life's not like that in music. You really have to build up stamina and expertise and an understanding of what good practice is about. And there's lots to learn. I'm still learning. The day I stop learning, it's time to stop teaching.
And I suppose, well, I don't know whether learning came into it or not, you'll have to tell me, but South America, you've been several times, I think now, to a choir in South America, in Colombia, training, working with children on the streets, basically.
Yes, it's been a fascinating project, that. It was actually set up by a Roman Catholic priest out there, and he was desperately concerned at the number of children who are sucked into the street gangs and the drugs barons, and often they have been orphaned by parents having to flee the country, or indeed being murdered in some cases. Awful, awful stories. And the choir was set up to give these children a different outlook on life. And working with them has been an absolutely eye-opening experience, quite terrifying in some ways, and yet hugely rewarding. I'm going back to see them all in the new year, and very much looking forward to see how they've grown another 12 months on after my previous visit. And it's given me, I think, a stronger faith in what I do, and a very real sense of church and faith in a way that is quite different to just attending church on a Sunday, or indeed in daily evensong. You know, you really do feel that there is a sense of religious need there, and music steps in an extremely effective way to give that vision of God and creation and all that it stands for.
So as you take up this role then, and working within the United Kingdom, are there resonances between what you learnt and saw in South America and here then? Way from the cathedral world, of course, too.
Yes, there are resonances in all sorts of different directions, and some quite stark contrasts too. For example, where you have children who have virtually nothing in life, to travel 3,000-4,000 miles and work with them, they see as an enormous asset and a great privilege. You do the same thing in England, and they'll be looking at their watches and wondering why they can't be going home and watching the television. That's a bit of a stark contrast, and it's certainly not the case in all the work that I've done in either venue. But there is a certain outlook on life for these children across in South America that has been very bleak indeed. And it reminds me, in a way, a few years ago I was actually doing some examining inside a prison, a high security prison, and I'd never been inside a prison before, but to go in and to see the privilege that this particular prisoner had in being allowed to do some music. I asked afterwards, I said, oh, out of interest, you know, how long is he in for? And the lady looking after me said, well, let's just say he's served his first 12 years. And I began to realize that music was much more of a bright light, a beacon in a very dark tunnel, than perhaps we all take for granted. And I see a reflection of that working with these children in South America. Suddenly you see music not being taken for granted, but being hugely valued. And that meant a great deal to me.
So I sense then, Adrian, really a sense of mission here as far as working with church musicians. Yes,
I've experienced music at all sorts of different levels, and I'm very passionate about music. I'm very passionate about what music can do in order to help people's lives. It has a very strong influence, I think, in terms of the way people relate to each other, how they cooperate in its most literal meaning. And really seeing music as a catalyst to a better lifestyle, and I don't mean lifestyle in terms of, you know, material goods, but just in terms of how people actually appreciate the world in which they live. And that, for me, whether you're working with adults or university-age students or children, they all have something to learn in that respect and something to get from music, which is why I think music has been such an important part of church life and of the Christian faith for so many hundreds of years.